Om Asato Ma Sadagamaya Tamaso Maham Jyotirgamaya Mrityurmam Amritam Gamaya Avir Avir Mairi Rudra Yate Dakshinam Mukha Tena Maha Paha Nityam. Om. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. And reach us through and through ourselves. And evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face.
Would you like that podium raised?
No, that's all right. That's all right. Don't worry. So my subject this morning is yoga and psychotherapy. And we're going to be talking about psychology east and west. By yoga, I mean the Raja Yoga of the Rishi Patanjali. And by psychotherapy, I'm not referring to any one particular school, but just generally to the whole practice of psychology. Yoga and psychotherapy, each one is a positive methodology. Each one focuses on one aspect of the spectrum of personal growth. Both are necessary for the holistic growth of the self. Psychology, East and West, each is great in its own place. But the duty of the one is not the duty of the other. And in order to appreciate that fact, we have to look more closely at the differences between them. Now, we can begin here by giving using a graphic organizer. If you visualize a mountain and a deep valley, and somewhere in between there's the foothill plateaus. And this analogy is a height analogy. And so we're going to be going from the lower to the higher. We're going to be going from the gross to the subtle to the causal, from the unconscious to the conscious to the superconscious, from the body to the mind to the soul. This is the progression. Now, there are two landmarks in this journey. One would be at the top of the foothills, the foothill plateau. And on the foothill plateau, there stands the self-actualized man. That is the individual who has integrated his personality around the conventional self. And conventional self means identifies with the body and mind, is born, lives, and dies. That's one landmark. High up on the mountain is the second. The mountain peak where sits the yogi, the self-realized yogi, who has realized and transcended the body and the mind, and who has discovered the spiritual self, which is immortal. So that's a pretty big journey. Let's begin here with the first part and look a little bit at Western psychology. Now, Western psychology is pretty much defined by the way, what we call psychology it wasn't invented until after maybe 1850. So it's relatively recent. And one of the hallmarks of psychology is that it's it is part of the theory, a developmental theory. And we can use, in order to kind of understand that, we can use some integral theory to look at that. That is, each one of us, our personal self, we're looking at personal self-growth. There are multiple lines of development. We know it's physical, emotional, intellectual, interpersonal, moral, spiritual. Now, each one of those multiple lines has multiple stages. And if we just take the growth of the self, beginning with the body self, matures, becomes identified with sensory, motor, emotional, the vital self, the interpersonal self, the persona, the shadow, all of these different levels of self-development. The idea is that we grow from the lower to the higher. We transition from the lower stage to a higher stage. Growth here, what do we mean by growth? By growth here, we mean a kind of a spiraling movement that's moving onward and upward, that identifies with the higher stage, moves around, cycles around, and experiences that stage, and then differentiates from that, transcends, and includes the lower, and so that the self of the lower becomes the object of the self of the higher. This is growth. This is our personal growth. Now, at any one of these stages of personal growth, there can be problems can arise. And all kinds of problems. We can say there's going to be problems of identification, failure to identify. There's going to be problems with failure to differentiate, fixating at one level. And then we're going to have problems with transcendence and inclusion. These are all problems, psychological problems that arise. And in the course of our growth, we have many people to help us. They're all part of our life. Our father, our parents, our siblings, our friends, our teachers, our all kinds of mentors, our ministers, a therapist, a psychologist. These are all people who help us with the problems that arise in the course of our gradual maturing. Theoretically, the conventional self reaches maturity. That is to say, reaches the age of reason. Theoretically, at that point, we're all grown up. But we know very well that even in middle age, even in old age, we're not really grown up. And therefore, it would be very useful and helpful and beneficial for us to go back and to get the help again of our mentors in life, and to get the benefits of their advice and their perspective, so that we can hasten our personal growth. Now, when we're talking here, we're talking particularly about psychology. So when we talk about psychology, we talk about, ordinarily, when people think about psychology, we think about Dr. Sigmund Freud and Dr. Carl Jung, and for very good reason, because they're the people who kind of invented the vocabulary and a lot of the basic concepts of what we call our own personal psychology. And so therefore, let's just look at that. If we're looking for some help and some benefit in the course of our personal growth, early psychology was called depth psychology. Depth psychology just means using the Freudian model of the iceberg. Now, you've seen pictures of the iceberg. The famous picture there, the iceberg, the little tip of the iceberg is above the surface, and the vast carriage of the whole berg is beneath the surface. You can't see it. It's beneath the water. It's invisible. Now, this is the depth psychology model of the mind. That is, the ego is just the tip of the iceberg. And you think that you're a free will agent who's in control of your life. But really speaking, we can understand that we are determined, predetermined, that we're driven, not just influenced, but we're determined by the unconscious desires, wishes, forces, currents, all kinds of repressed trauma and everything else that goes in psychiatry. And all this is down below the surface. It's in the dark. It's in the basement. And it's hidden from us. And it controls us. And we can't, what can we do? We're not even aware of it. We don't even know what's happening. And therefore, the first principle of all psychotherapy is the very first step in dealing with problems is awareness. To become aware of what's going on. And therefore, depth psychology, that's the purpose of depth psychology, is to bring the unconscious material somehow, using all variety of different techniques, to somehow bring the unconscious up into the conscious level so that the rational self can process it and integrate it and understand it and somehow deal with it. That's the methodology. Now both, I'm taking his example here, Freud and Jung, both of them begin, the whole story begins with the treatment of people who are in a state of mental disorder. And you got the whole spectrum of people who are mildly neurotic and living in denial of their feelings and have all kinds of defense mechanisms, all the way up to people who are psychotic and have completely broken from reality. These are the patients that the therapists in the early days are working with. And now all of these patients, if you're mentally disordered, if you have a mental disorder, and you have, all of such patients have at least two symptoms. One of them is that a disordered mind, and I'm using that terminology because I'm thinking there, the Plato is very big on, when he talks, he's used philosophical psychology, long before the psychology that we know of what we call psychology. Plato talks about the ordered psyche, which is a model. So the idea here is that these are people who are disordered, and they have two problems. Number one is such a person is necessarily going to be unhappy. And secondly, is that that person is going to be dysfunctional. That means he probably doesn't fit in very well with society. It's difficult for such a person to be socialized and to become a normal member of society. And so such people, such patients, who are the subject of analysis here, were considered to be, the problem was, they were abnormal. Now we can say, okay, well, yeah, but what do you mean by normal? Because we look around and we see that most of the people that we know are kind of like a little crazy. And yeah, that's true. But see, most of the people that we know are happy and functional. They may be a little crazy, but they're happy, relatively happy and functional in society. So let's just use that as a yardstick. That's kind of a rule of thumb. That's a rough definition then of normal. Normal. And that idea, the idea is to, well, it was stated very well, that definition was stated very well in the title of a pop psychology book long ago by well, these of course are real bona fide psychologists. His name was Thomas Harris. He wrote a book called I Am Okay, You're Okay. Now this is like the pragmatic definition of success in depth psychology. If you can bring a person out from abnormal up into the range of being normal, in other words, if he can say, I'm okay, you're okay, then everything's okay. And there's no problem. Now this is kind of where Western psychology ends. Now you may say, well, what about, there's other kinds of psychology. What about humanistic psychology? What about positive psychology? What about so-called transpersonal psychology. Those all seem to begin with ordinary people. They're not occupied with so much with treating patients as they are with optimizing, high-level potential, human potential movement. What about that? To which we can say, yeah, okay, that's all part of. Let's look at the guy here. Let's look here at the guy who is at the top of the hill now. He is a self-actualized individual. He's come up that valley, and he looks back, and he's come a long way. He's worked through he's matured. He's worked through all kinds of problems, maybe physical, emotional, interpersonal, personal. He's gotten the help of many people. And as a result of which, he has become integrated. And he's happy, kind of, and he's functional. In fact, let's say that he is even better. Let's assume that he's very successful. Well, he has family, he has friends, he lives in a big house, he has a well-paying job, he has 2 cars and a boat, and he's traveled the whole world. So, well, now he's such a person, we can imagine such a person, but he feels a kind of a inner dis-ease, a kind of a feeling of inner emptiness. In other words, he's not completely self-fulfilled. He's like the person described by the Zen Buddhist philosophers of a guy who climbed up with great difficulty to the top of a 50-foot flagpole. And at the top of that flagpole, he thought to himself, now what? I've achieved great success. Nobody else has done this. But where am I going to go from here? What's the point now? What's the purpose? What's the meaning of my life? Now, these are not psychological questions. These are existential questions. They're questions about they're philosophical questions about the deeper meaning of life itself. And we all have to face these questions and deal with them at some point in our life. These are the kinds of questions that we could generalize to say characterize the collective consciousness of the whole Western world. And the Western world, which has achieved great, wonderful success in science and technology and in material prosperity, all of those achievements, and yet still collective consciousness is kind of characterized by a feeling of existential despair. That's why some people have said that most of the patients in the psychiatrist's office today are not suffering from personal problems at all, but they're suffering rather from the symptoms of this deeper existential predicament. That is, their problem is all about identity and meaning and mortality and purpose and fulfillment. And in fact, This was an observation of Dr. Carl Jung, and I'll just paraphrase him, famous quote of where he said, after 30 years of practice, he's reminiscing now. He says, over my past 30 years of practice, people from all the civilized countries of the world have consulted with me. And of all those people who are past middle age, that may be past 35, of all those people, he says, there's not been one whose problem has not been that of finding a religious outlook on life. Now let's think about that. Let's think about a religious outlook on life. Think about the Christian Bible, in the book of Luke. You remember the parable about the father. The father was a very successful farmer. He had farmhouses and buildings and fields, and he had cattle and sheep, and he had 2 sons. He called the sons to him one day, and he said, when I die, all of this estate will be yours. This is your inheritance. And the elder brother thought, well, yes, okay, good. And he went back to work as usual in the fields. But the younger brother thought to himself, no, he says, Father, please give me my portion of the inheritance now. I want to take it and make my own way in the world. And so the father agreed. And the son set off. He traveled far, far away from the country and the farm, came down into the big city and the bright lights. And there he began to enjoy his life. And he had a lot of money in his pocket, and so he soon had some fast friends. And he used to buy them wine and champagne, and he would hire musicians, and they would dance the night away. And time passed, and he started to smoke and to drink and to gamble. And in this way, the prodigal son, he began to waste. He wasted his life. He was wasting his life. And one morning, time passed, and one morning he woke up, and he didn't feel very good. He felt he lost his health, he lost virtually all his money, and his mind was he was kind of depressed, and about that time, a great famine came into the land. That is, a drought. And as a result of the drought, everything dried up. It became a famine. People were starving. And here the boy, he had to, very soon, what little money he had left, he had used to pay his debts. And he soon found himself starving. And he looked and worked for work. Finally, the only work that he could find was tending swine in a stockyard. And so there he sat, still hungry, tending and as he looked at those pigs as they were eating in the mud, there they were being delivered big bags full of corn. And he thought to himself, even these pigs are eating so much better than I am. And then he began to think, that the servants in my Father's house, they are all well fed and they're so well cared for. Like this, he began to think, the wheels began, and then he resolved, I will return to my Father. And so he set off on the journey, long journey, returning home. And all the while he's thinking, I will tell my Father that I've been sinned against God. I've wasted my time. I've wasted my inheritance. Please forgive me that I want to. Please, if I could just work as a servant in your house, that I would be so grateful. And he was so worried and he was so concerned that his father would drive him away. But as he's thinking like this, he looks up the road, and what does he see? He sees a man coming towards him. Who is it? It's his father. He's running towards him, open arms. Son, hello, come, you come back home. Welcome back. And so, the prodigal son was welcomed home, and they gave a big feast, and they all celebrated the return of the lost son. So this is the idea that a cycle of life, is a great cycle. And we have problems. But in the end, all of our problems in life, the only ultimate solution to those problems will be to return to the source. And so this is where we've left Western psychology behind, the guy on the hill. Now let's turn now to yoga psychology. Because now yoga psychology, this is where yoga psychology starts. At the beginning of that road, returning to the Father. That's where it starts. Now yoga psychology is about the, what time is it there? You got the time?
34.
Huh? Okay. Okay. The yoga psychology is the applied psychology of the Sankhya philosophy. So there's a whole body of philosophical analysis of the structure and the faculties of the mind. Today we would call it faculty psychology. This was the Sankhya psychology. Built on that, and the Sankhya theory of perception, is the yoga psychology of Patanjali. Now, Sankhya is very interesting because Sankhya makes Vedanta easy for us. That's why you gotta read the lectures on Swami Vivekananda on the Sankhya cosmology and the Sankhya philosophy, because it's a very helpful introduction for us to understand the Vedanta. Now in Sankhya, they divide the whole world, the reality into 25 cosmic principles. But just to make it easy, they reduce those all to two things: Prakriti and Purusha. The subject and the object. Now that's easy. There's consciousness and there's nature. Now nature here has a capital N. Nature here does not just mean the wilderness and go out and see the trees and the flowers. Nature here means all of the gross, the subtle, and the causal, the macrocosm and the microcosm. That is the body and the mind. All of this is included in nature. Nature here means the Indian concept of matter. That is, the elements. It's just all made of the 5 elements. That's all it is. It's just stuff. And there's this stuff, and over on the other side of the stuff is pure consciousness. Now, this is yoga psychology. This is Patanjali. Now, Patanjali yoga is sometimes called Raja Yoga. Let's think about a Raja. A Raja is a king. A king one day goes, there's an analogy of Kapila. which I've modified a little bit. So the king goes to the theater, and he sits down there in the theater with his entourage, and lo and behold, the curtains open, and there the dancing girls come out on the stage. And the king, his eyes open wide, and he becomes mesmerized and spellbound by that sight. He loves the whole unfolding, the dance and the melodrama. He completely forgets his own true nature, everything. He becomes absorbed and identified with that show in the stage. This is Mahamaya, the language of Vedanta. Mahamaya, he's completely forgotten his identity. Now in yoga psychology, this is the problem. The Purusha, that is your conscious self, yourself, you've forgotten your true nature, and you're identified with nature, external and internal. That's your problem. And so what do you have to do? Well, how do we get the king back? Well, he has to be, best way to think, maybe he has to be dehypnotized. He's hypnotized. That's our condition, by the way. The king here means us. That's the common man, is hypnotized by nature. And what we got to do is, in order to, that's the problem. And what's the solution? The solution is to somehow dehypnotize him. He has to disidentify and return to the remembrance of his true nature. The Purusha has to recall its true nature as pure consciousness. That's the goal. That's the goal of yoga psychology. Notice the goal here is not to integrate your personality. The goal is not to work through any of your personal problems. The goal here is to realize your true self, pure consciousness, which is your soul. See, you have a body, mind, and a soul. And your soul is immortal. And the soul has you, that is you yourself, have forgotten your true nature. And the goal here now is to remember your identity, that is, as a divine immortal soul. That's the Purusha. Purushas, you say, no, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like psychology to me. That sounds like religion. Well, religion? Yeah, it is. Well, we could call it Hindu mysticism, or I call it. It is about religion. Mysticism is kind of the kernel. It's the kernel of religion. If you take all the externalities of religion, exoteric religion, and leave them aside, the esoteric, the essence of religion is mysticism. And what we're talking about this morning, we're talking about the great path of meditation. Includes all yogas, of course, but in particular, we're talking about meditation. And what could be a more perfect definition of religion, derived from the Latin re legare, that is to linking back to the source, which is exactly what we're doing. Exactly what's the purpose of yoga, is to return to the source. The Purusha has to return to its source. That's the goal. Now, what is the method? The method of yoga begins not with a patient, it begins not with a patient with a disordered mind, but rather it begins with that guy who's on the hill, who's completely integrated and who's successful, and yet who is feeling dissatisfied and who's wanting to define his purpose in life. Now, yoga has given us that purpose. That is, the wisdom of the East has given us that purpose. Now he has that purpose. And what is the methodology here? Well, it begins. It's a whole progression of a systematic, methodical progression through 8 stages, which you all know about the 8 stages of yoga, beginning here with moral and ethical, establishment of moral and ethical self-culture. Morality is not enough. You have to develop spiritual virtues. In addition to the moral virtues, the spiritual virtues. In addition to that, this is all the progression now. This is the methodology. In addition to the spiritual virtues, you have to develop what you have to do, essentially, is you have to withdraw your mind from the external world. This is the stages of yoga. It's called pratyahara. That means you have to, it's a form of renunciation. And you have to turn your mind inward and to focus on the process of introspection. That's a very important stage, by the way. Withdrawing the mind from the world, because you remember how Sri Ramakrishna tells about the man who lives on one side of the lake. He goes down one evening, he gets in his rowboat, rows across the lake to the tavern, and there in the tavern he drinks till he's intoxicated and he's drunk. And now it's 2 a.m. and he leaves and it's pitch dark. And he goes down to the rowboat. He gets in there, into the boat, and he rows and he rows and he rows. And finally he looks around, he realizes the sun is rising. It's getting light. And he sees he hasn't moved an inch. And why is that? Well, he forgot to weigh the anchor. So that's a simple this is yoga. This is the teaching of Raja Yoga. That you're not going to get anywhere unless you can withdraw your mind from the external world. Now thinking about the yogi now. Now we're kind of visualizing the yogi who's up on the mountain peak. He's on this is the great path, this is the mountain path of meditation. And he's going to, these are the stages. Now let's look here more carefully at this idea of the Purusha. And then we'll come back to the stages. The idea of the Purusha is defined. The Purusha is your conscious self. The Purusha is the witness. What is the witness? Well, you look out your window and you see an auto accident. Oh, I'm the witness. Yeah, okay, yeah. You witnessed something, it's true, in a sense. But if you look down at your feet and your hands, you can say, I witnessed my feet and the hands. But no, really, you can't really say that. Nobody says that. Why? Because we're identified with the body. We say, it's my hands, I see them. I can see them, I know that I have them, but I wouldn't say I'm the witness, no. Similarly with my mind, maybe I can say I witness my thoughts, well, maybe, but usually we don't talk like that. But the Purusha, that is your soul, is the witness, not only of externalities, but of your own body and the mind. The Purusha is the witness consciousness. What does that mean? The witness consciousness, to witness is all about, witnessing is about the conscious awareness. Consciousness is like light. Your consciousness is like light. It's a light source. Think about, and let's think now back to the king who's in the theater. The king and the audience are in the theater, and they're watching the stage play. But meanwhile, there is a lamp in the theater that's burning high above everything. The light is filling the whole theater. And the light is intimately touching everything in the theater. It is intimately revealing everything in the theater, from the audience to the stage. But it's also, we could say, it's detached. What do we mean by detachment? Detachment here means it's unattached. It's touching everything. It's intimately revealing everything. And yet, it doesn't see, it doesn't hear, it doesn't act, it doesn't move, it doesn't think, it doesn't talk, it doesn't feel. It's just light. It's just pure consciousness. That's the Purusha. The Purusha is the witness. Now in yoga, the mind, what is the mind? The mind is completely different. The mind is like a lake. And you say the lake, visualize the lake. And maybe the wind is blowing, the rain is falling, and we can understand that there's all kinds of waves and disturbance on the surface. And therefore, any reflection of the trees or the buildings on the side are all those reflections in that fractured surface. Is everything is all shaking and trembling and discombobulated. And but if we could somehow calm the wind, stop the rain, and if the lake of the mind could gradually become more and more calm and serene. This is the goal and purpose of yoga, is to make your mind serene. Notice here, the yogis are not interested in the contents of your mind so much. They're interested only in two things. They're interested in the stillness. They're interested in the mind itself. They're not interested in what you're thinking about so much as control. They're interested in controlling the mind itself. They're interested in stillness and clarity of the water. That's all. And so this is the progression here of the yoga, different stages here of yoga psychology, is we get control over our mind, begin to train the mind to focus and to concentrate, and to achieve a high state of concentration called samadhi, perfect concentration, stillness. That's the goal. And once we've achieved that goal, the mind is calm. What happens? Well, if you were to look at a lake in such a condition, immediately you see it's like a mirror. And all of the beautiful trees and flowers, everything is reflected in the water as it is. It's a mirror. How wonderful. You can see, for the first time, you can see, if you could similarly as your own mind, it's just common sense, your mind, if you could calm your mind completely, then you would see reality, you'd see things as they really are. You'd wake up to reality. But the yogis go farther because they say that's not their purpose. Their purpose is not to wake up to reality. Their purpose is to take the mind, which is now like the mirror, and turn it away from the world and towards the Purusha, so that the Purusha can realize himself and regain his consciousness of his true nature. That's the purpose. And this is the goal of yoga practice, is to achieve this high purpose, to realize your true nature, that is your soul nature. We could call this soul psychology. We could call it self-psychology. If we use the self and the Purusha as just the Vedantic self, the Atman, we could call it self-psychology. And so let me just summarize then what we've said so far. We've said we got yoga, and we have all different kinds of applied psychology. We have Western psychology, and we have Hindu psychology, by which I'm meaning here yoga psychology. Both are important. Both address and are focused on different parts of the spectrum of growth of the self. Western psychology is depth psychology, we could say. Eastern psychology, we could say, is height psychology. That is, it's all about taking up where they left off, getting on the mountain path, and achieving self-realization. And today, all of us have come a long way in our pursuit of self-knowledge and personal growth. But our focus today is now on the ascent of the mountain. And that's our purpose. That's our focus. And becoming successful in that enterprise, that is, in realizing our true nature, that will give us the peace and the happiness that we seek. Thank you.
So, thank you, Swami Vedarupananda, for that very well thought out talk. Beautiful exposition of the two systems. Next week we have Holy Mother in the Eyes of Swami Vivekananda, Part 5 with Swami Sumanasananda. And our weekly classes will be continuing. So there'll be a Tuesday class on the 9th and Wednesday class on the 10th. That's Swami Sarvadevananda giving both of those. And the Thursday class on the 11th will be Swami Mahayogananda on Karma Yoga. And we have, we resume our teachings of Swami Ramakrishnananda at 7:30 on Fridays. We had a vacation with the big celebration for Buddha a couple days ago. And let's see, that is all of the upcoming events. So you can close with a chant, and then you can have questions and answers. Yes. And refreshments.
Okay. Yeah, please join us in the green room if you have question, answer, or commentary, or pushback, or disagreement. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksha Ham Shantihi Prithivi Shantihi Apashantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Saravam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Same Shantirehi Om Shantihi 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 Om. Peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.